Professor Zix then adjusted his crystalline spectacles as he reviewed his notes for galactic biology. 101, the Corellian educator, had spent decades studying the dietary habits of various species across the galaxy, and today's lesson would focus on the newly admitted species from the third planet of the Sol system, humans. The lecture hall filled with students from 12 different worlds: the plant-like Verdani, the aquatic Neptunians, the silicon-based lithoids, and various other beings. Among them sat Jack Morrison and Daisy Chen, the only two human students at Galactic University. Today we shall examine the fascinating dietary evolution of Homo sapiens, Professor Zixthon began, his four eyes scanning the room. Based on extensive analysis of their dental structure, specifically their flat molars and relatively small canines, we can conclude that humans are primarily herbivorous creatures, subsisting mainly on vegetation, fruits, and leaves. Jack and Daisy exchanged glances from their seats in the middle row. Daisy raised her hand tentatively. "Professor, I think there might be some—" "Please hold your questions until the end, Miss Chen," Zixthon interrupted politely. "As I was saying, the human digestive system, with its elongated intestinal tract, clearly indicates a species evolved to process plant matter. Their forward-facing eyes are merely an evolutionary quirk, not an indication of predatory behavior." The professor activated his holographic display, showing detailed anatomical diagrams. "Notice how their jaw structure lacks the pronounced canines of carnivorous species. Their teeth are clearly designed for grinding vegetation. In fact, I hypothesize that wild humans likely spent their days foraging for leaves, much like the gentle Verdani here among us." A few Verdani students rustled their foliage-like appendages in what Jack had learned was their equivalent of laughter. "Furthermore," the professor continued, warming to his subject, "their relatively weak bite force and lack of natural claws suggest they were peaceful gatherers, possibly living in harmony with their planet's ecosystem, by consuming only what the plants willingly provided: fallen fruits, shed leaves, perhaps some nuts." Jack's stomach chose that moment to rumble audibly. He'd skipped breakfast that morning, and the professor's description of humans as gentle leaf eaters was making him increasingly hungry for the exact opposite of vegetation. "The humans' lack of natural weapons," Zixthon continued, "combined with their fragile skin and slow running speed, clearly indicates they evolved as non-threatening herbivores. They likely posed no danger to any other species on their world." A lithoid student, whose species consumed minerals, raised a rocky appendage. "Professor, if humans are so peaceful, how did they develop space travel? Most herbivorous species we've encountered are quite passive." "An excellent question, Granite 9. You see, intelligence can develop in herbivorous species as a means of finding better food sources and avoiding predators. Humans likely use their intelligence to cultivate better plants and hide from the true apex predators of their world." Daisy tried again. "Professor, with respect, I really think you should know—" "Please, Miss Chen, let me finish the theoretical framework first." Zixthon's enthusiasm was infectious to everyone except the two humans present. "I believe humans represent a unique evolutionary path, intelligence arising not from the need to hunt, but from the complex social cooperation required for efficient gathering and food sharing." Jack whispered to Daisy, "Should we tell him about the barbecue we had last weekend?" "Shh," she replied, but she was fighting back laughter. The professor continued for another 20 minutes, building an elaborate theory about humanity's peaceful, plant-based civilization. He described how humans probably lived in tree cities, carefully harvesting only what they needed, existing in perfect harmony with nature. "And so," he concluded, "we see that humans represent perhaps the most successful herbivorous species to achieve interstellar travel. Their success stems from cooperation, intelligence, and their gentle approach to resource consumption." The professor finally opened the floor for questions. Jack stood up immediately. "Professor Zixthon, this has been fascinating, but I think there are a few things about human dietary habits you might want to reconsider." "Oh? Do enlighten us, Mr. Morrison. Perhaps you can share some traditional human plant-based recipes?" Jack grinned and reached into his backpack. "Actually, I brought lunch." He pulled out a container and opened it, revealing a large, rare steak that he'd been planning to eat cold. The rich red meat was visible to the entire lecture hall. The room fell silent. Professor Zixthon's four eyes widened simultaneously. That appears to be muscle tissue from another organism, the professor stammered. Yep, Jack said cheerfully, pulling out a fork. Beef from a cow, cooked rare. He cut off a piece and ate it with obvious satisfaction. Humans are actually omnivores, Professor. We eat both plants and animals. In fact, we're pretty efficient hunters when we want to be. Daisy stood up as well, pulling out her own lunch, a chicken sandwich. We also cook our meat, which is something most carnivorous species don't do. We figured out how to use fire to make food safer and more nutritious. The professor's crystalline spectacles nearly fell off his face. But your teeth, your digestive system, evolved for versatility, Jack explained between bites. We can survive on plants if we have to, but we really thrive on a mixed diet. Our ancestors were persistence hunters. We'd literally run prey to exhaustion over long distances. And the whole hiding from predators thing? Daisy added. We kind of became the apex predator on our planet. Not through strength or natural weapons, but through intelligence, cooperation, and tools. A Neptunian student gurgled a question. If humans are hunters, how did they become so civilized? Jack and Daisy looked at each other. Well, Daisy said thoughtfully, being able to hunt effectively required complex planning, communication, and social cooperation. Same skills that eventually led to agriculture, cities, and space travel. Plus, Jack added, finishing his steak, nothing motivates technological advancement quite like figuring out better ways to catch dinner. Professor Zixthon sat down heavily in his chair, his entire worldview shifting. I need to revise my entire lecture series. Don't worry, Professor, Daisy said kindly. Want to join us for dinner tonight? Jack's making his famous barbecue ribs. The professor's expression was a mixture of horror and fascination. Yes, actually. For research purposes, of course. As the students filed out of the lecture hall, chattering excitedly about this revelation, Jack patted the professor on one of his 4 shoulders. Professor, there's something else you should probably know about humans. What's that, Mr. Morrison? Jack grinned. We didn't just hunt animals on our planet. We domesticated them, bred them, and turned hunting into agriculture. We made our food sources work for us. Professor Zixthon stared at him for a long moment, then began frantically taking notes. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Your species managed to become apex predators and successful agriculturalists simultaneously. Welcome to humanity, Professor, Daisy called over her shoulder as she left. We're full of surprises. As the lecture hall emptied, Professor Zixthon remained at his desk, rewriting everything he thought he knew about the deceptively complex species called humans. Tomorrow's lecture, he realized, would be very different indeed.